Right, yes.
Right, can you first of all, when is the auction?
The auction is on the 26th of August.
26th of, so
Gleneagles Hotel in Scotland.
You might have been lucky enough to have already been shooting by then.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to take that day off, pop down to Gleneagles.
Yeah.
And buy the gun that you actually...
Exactly, that is all part of the grand plan. I mean, I think it'll be the 52nd year that we've had that there's been a gun sale held at the Gleneagles Hotel. It's always traditionally that sort of last weekend of August, 2 weeks into the grouse. All of the great and the good are north of the border, and likewise, we have a lot of overseas clients still who will tie in their sporting holiday with your
sale. You're part of the entertainment.
So they may well have been stalking and fishing as well, and a couple of days on the grouse, and work in viewing the sale over the weekend, or maybe attending the event on the Monday night.
I can't believe you've been doing it for 52 years. You look so young.
Exactly. I've only actually been doing that bit. Yeah, only 32 years.
Only 30.
Myself. Yeah.
You hardly started in the gun trade.
Yeah, exactly. I've been to every one for the last 32 years. But yes.
Okay. Now you have got a stand here, haven't you?
I do have a stand. Yeah.
So if anybody wants to,
Gunmakers Row. Yeah.
Anybody gets excited about these guns, you can go and find Gavin afterwards.
Yeah,
now,
exactly. Tell you all about them.
Tell us about this one.
Okay,
I'm not sure I'd want to shoot grouse with that, would I?
No. Well, that is a very nice. I mean, that's very interesting for a number of ways. It's a very nice Pinfire Hammer gun. It's an early gun built in. Crikey, you see, I've got a test.
Look, he's cribbing.
I can't remember the date, and it's also built for an interesting gentleman whose name I can't quite remember off the top of my head.
Phil. There it is.
Yeah, no, there it is. You see, it's a lovely Stephen Grant. Pinfire Hammer.
I've got Stephen Grant's.
Yeah. But the unusual thing about it, for a Pinfire, it is in such lovely, honest, original condition. Very often, you see, Pinfire it came out before centerfire, so it's a cartridge that has a little pin that protrudes from the side of it, so which is why you have the shape of the hammer. So they effectively come down on the top of the barrel where the pin is protruding. So the firing pin is in the cartridge rather than in the gun. And what happened is when these became obsolete very quickly, within 5 years of being introduced, what happened is nearly all of them were converted, because it was a very simple case of changing the hammers, putting pins into the breech of the gun, and then you've got a centerfire hammer gun. It was a very easy conversion. But this one is wonderful. It has never been altered. It's never been touched. It was built in. There we are. It was 1867.
Busket.
But the great thing about it, apart from the remarkable condition, it was owned by an interesting gentleman. It was built for Edward George Graham Sutton, who was a first-class cricketer. He played on MCC sides along with W.C. Grace.
Oh, so he was part of that 19th century.
He was part of that, that sort of cricketing elite in that golden era. And that's his.
And it's got a lever to open it underneath, I noticed.
Yeah. Jones rotary underlever to open it. Damascus barrels, very well figured walnut stock. It's just a very nice example. And for a gun that also you don't need a license to own.
Oh, really?
Pinfire is deemed to be an obsolete caliber. As long as you possess no ammunition, you may keep that as an antique or curio without license. And that's carrying an estimate of between £1,200 and £1,800. So it's a sort of positive bargain to be honest. It's one of those rare things that a double-barrel breech-loading hammer gun that you can legally own without a certificate, and leave out on you can display it, you can enjoy it without having to find the keys for your gun cabinet every time you want to look at it. Yeah.
So I've got a lovely inherited pair of Stephen Grant's made for an ancestor of mine who was also a cricketer around about 1892, and they're side openers. Grant was all over the shop with opening, wasn't he?
Yes, I was going to say the side lever is for Grant's later side lock guns. Their push down side lever is the absolute classic feature. Everybody loves a side lever.
I love it. It's quite a fat breech. I mean,
although sort of aesthetically, it mainly looks fat because you haven't got that lever going down the middle.
Of course, yes.
Width-wise, they're essentially the same, but you have a completely different aesthetic because you've got that lovely clean, tidy top surface without a lever getting in the way, and that lovely sort of direct action of opening the lever, which is so easy.
Tell us about this one, please.
That is it's a Holland Holland .240 Apex bolt action sporting rifle. 240 Apex was one of Holland Holland's proprietary calibers, and again it's just a very nice, an absolutely classic stalking rifle. That was a rifle that was built in the 20s. And again, it remains in remarkably fine condition. It's virtually unused. It's been in store for the last 50 years. So it still has some of the sort of packing grease and things on it. And it appears to have been virtually unused when it went into store. You know, it's something, you know, 240 Apex has been superseded by, well, the 243 really, and a number of other calibers. But it is a fantastic vintage Holland and Holland bolt-action sporting rifle.
Holland Holland were originally rifle makers, weren't they?
Yeah,
I mean, they were never. I mean, they were pretty bad at shotguns, weren't they?
Oh yeah. But they were. Yeah, they were best known. Really for their success in the field gun and rifle trials, for their rifles, their Rook rifles.
They got better at shotguns.
They did they did. Certainly once they sort of got their own gun making factory and introduced the sort of the second version of their Royal model, they finally had a gun that could compete with Boss and Purdy at the very top end of the side-by-side shotgun market.
Now this is a 248.
The 248.
The cartridges will be expensive, but would you be happy taking this on the hill?
Yes. Yeah. It would be and again, you need to have good eyes, because the great thing about it is it has never had a scope put on it.
Oh, really?
Because and again, from a collector's point of view, that is wonderful, because so many of these nice vintage rifles, if they weren't originally scoped when they were new. And of course, it's a much nicer rifle to carry on the hill and over your shoulder, because you haven't got a great big
very
scope
pretty,
clattering around on the back, and they're quicker to load because you can get the rounds in quicker because you haven't got a scope getting in the way. But the wonderful thing about it from a collector's point of view is it hasn't been altered, because what happened is during the 60s, when cheap Japanese scopes appeared on the market. Prior to that, scopes were always German and terribly expensive. Cheap Japanese scopes came onto the market, and you would just buy the Nikko Sterling scope, get the Parker Hale mounting blocks, get your electric drill out and drill 4 holes in the top of the receiver.
Oh, no.
Get it tapped, screw them on there, and you've instantly transformed your rifle into a modern rifle with a telescopic sight, and from the collector's point of view, destroyed it.
And for a scrap value, I think you should be looking
at.
But from a guide price value, what are you looking at for that?
I think we're looking at between about £1,400 and £1,800. So it's not an expensive.
How much is a 248 cartridge, and where would I buy one?
Holland and Holland do still. It's a caliber that they have quite recently. Manufactured ammunition for it has been available quite recently.
Now this looks much more the kind of thing you should be taking onto the grouse moor.
Oh yes, that's a fantastic gun. That's the Bird of Prey gun. It's a 12-bore Purdy style single trigger over and under side lock ejector gun, built in the late 80s by a London maker called Symes and Wright. I think it's 1987 or 88.
When you say Bird of Prey gun, you don't mean it was used for hen harriers, do you?
No. But it's engraved. It's engraved by an engraver, Rashid El Hadi. And it's engraved with some wonderful bird of prey scenes, and I think it was probably slightly aimed at the sort of the Arabian market, perhaps. And Rashid is a fantastic engraver who's done a lot of work for Holland. He's worked for Holland's, but he's predominantly worked for Wesley Richards and done some stunning work. A real artist. But this was the first ever over and under gun that Symes and Wright built. Now you're probably looking puzzled and saying, who the hell is Symes and Wright? Symes and Wright. Well, if I'd been sat in this chair 30 years ago, you would all know exactly who Symes and Wright were, because they were in every magazine, and this gun was on a few magazine covers back in the day. Symes and Wright were set up. Pete Symes and Alex Wright were both former Purdy gunmakers, and they were disillusioned with their employer, and they decided that they were going to build a better gun, and without the expenses of the South Audley House premises and everything, dealing direct with their suppliers and outworkers. They were going to build essentially take on Purdy at their own game.
Did you know them?
Yes, and for a few years they were very successful at that. They were delivering essentially a Purdy gun at 2/3 of the Purdy price.
There's a great tradition
that was finished to I would say a higher standard than a Purdy gun of the time.
So it's like a Purdy but better.
But of course, unfortunately, the economic recession of the early 90s unfortunately sort of wiped out their business.
Yeah, the market went. There is a thing in gun making is where you say when you just start out, you say my name is James Purdy from Manton, don't you? I used to work.
Exactly. And then Frederick Beasley, who famously invented the self-opening action that Purdy's have used since 1880, he essentially used the money and the royalties that he earned from selling the patent to his employer to set up his own business and became Frederick Beasley from Purdy's. Henry Atkin did exactly the same thing. Henry Atkin from Purdy's.
So Purdy was the one that generally sort of produced the most amount of talent.
And Purdy has very significantly been that sort of premium name, if you like, ever since the beginning of his career, because he was essentially the successor to Joseph Manton's business, and took over his premises when Manton's business failed. He sort of finished off the remaining orders and then carried on under his own name.
And this is Purdy the Older.
Because
Purdy the Younger was a bit of a shocker, wasn't he?
And then you got Jane. Yeah, it's all the Purdy stories are a fascinating tale. There are a couple of fascinating books about one that Richard Beaumont wrote about the family, and then of course the great gun making history that Donald Dallas did more recently.
Now this again looks magnificent, but I mean,
now this is perfect. This is a classic modern Scottish gun. It's a David McKay Brown single trigger over and under. It's a relatively modern gun. I think built in either 2006 or 2008. Engraved by Creative Art, fantastic Italian engravers with the Scottish large scroll engraving. It's got a woodcock, I think, engraved underneath it. 31-inch barrels. Quite a lot of choke. It is a classic but modern specification. It's a relatively hefty gun with long barrels. It's ideally suited for high birds as well as for regular game. I probably would say it's a little bit long and heavy for the grouse moor, to be absolutely honest. Or certainly to my mind, I've always felt that for grouse you need a quick and fast lightweight gun.
So one of the reasons that people go for what must be the bane of your life, which is the Beretta Silver Pigeon or the Browning 725, is because you can, if necessary, shoot steel shot through them or Magnum or rusty nails or whatever they are.
Whatever you want to.
But if you're looking at something like this, could you do that with that?
I think this one is 2 3/4 superior proofed, so you can. So you can.
Is there a date you should be looking for where it kind of became pretty normal?
Well, it's sort of become. It's still optional. It's only really relatively recently become normal. Yes, it's only sort of within the last 10 or 15 years that all these new Berettas are all steel proofed. And it's only it really is until really very recently most things are still not proofed for steel. It's a bit debatable as to whether whether steel is a very satisfactory substitute for lead anyway. It's the economics are the main reason everybody seems to like it, but
I think we're hearing from Tom Adams of the British Game Alliance earlier on that actually there's one supermarket chain that I think it's Waitrose will only buy steel shot birds next season, which is going to be complicated.
It's going to be that is going to be complicated.
Exactly. So for people with nails of guns they don't really like that's going to work as well. Next one.
What have we got coming up
it comes in and it's a pair.
It's a pair of Purdy's. Yeah, fantastic pair of guns. These.
This must be your kind of most high value item, surely.
Yeah. Well, again, bizarrely, there is a reason. They're an absolutely classic pair. I think they're built in 1956. They've got good long stocks. Virtually all of their original finish and hardening colour. They're a virtually unused pair of guns. Today this pair of guns would cost you over £300,000 from Purdy's.
That would cost you £300,000 from Purdy.
Yeah.
And these ones are unused. So how much are you selling them for?
Between 25 and 30,000.
Oh, come on. Yeah. Just somebody turn upside down and shake. How much have you got on you? He'd probably taken off at the game fair.
Unfortunately, the reason for the remarkably low valuation is the fact that they have short barrels. They have 26-inch barrels. And everybody in the marketplace today wants them to have 30-inch barrels.
Well,
so they're 4 inches short. They're very, very fast moving. They handle very well. They're very quick. They would make an absolutely ideal pair of grouse guns in my book, and I would be very happy to own them. But unfortunately, the majority of shots in the market today believe that 30 inches or longer is the magic length.
Really, and therefore
they have relatively little interest in owning a pair of guns with an unfashionably short pair of barrels.
So fashion has so much to answer for.
Fashion, it does indeed.
I have a vague memory, and please can you confirm or deny this, the short barrel sort of most recently came about as part of Churchill's gun making in the mid-1920s.
Yeah.
Up to then it had been quite long, hadn't it?
30 inches had been the optimum length up until that point, and there were a variety of reasons for that. Part of it being it was essentially the shortest length of barrel you could have when using black powder that would allow for full combustion of the powder charge, and also it's a nice length. You have to remember that at this time guns were still muzzle loading, and it was a length that brings the muzzle of the gun up to a convenient height, so that you can easily put the charge of shot and the charge of powder in while standing up without having to reduce the tip the gun up at a funny angle. It was and likewise with a double barrel gun, it was an optimum. You still had very good handling qualities as well. So it was kind of the ultimate compromise of a length. Of course, when smokeless powders came along, which burned much more quickly, Robert Churchill decided that a great selling point would be to have a unique selling point, as it were, and short barrels were the thing. He believed that he was very successful as a live pigeon shot, and he believed that the quicker you got on the target and pulled the trigger,
which is very much the case with traps.
Which makes it, and particularly with a live pigeon, it's you pull, the bird comes out of the trap and is rocketing away from you. The quicker you can get on it and kill it and have it drop in the ring, the more success you're going to have. And he'd invented a style of shooting and he was a very good instructor, and he could teach people to shoot who couldn't shoot, who every other instructor had given up on. He was a remarkable sort of raconteur and instructor, and created this fashion for short barrels, and literally up until the 1970s. 25, 26 and 27 inches were very popular barrel lengths.
Were they? Yes. So, as I recall, the reason for James Purdy the Younger's success in the live pigeon shoot trap, which was a very, very important thing in the late 19th century, was by bribing the trappers. That seemed to be the fastest. Right, so Churchill was going down the more honest route. So somebody could get a lovely pair of Purdy's for 1/10 of the price, but they're just going to have to put up with blunderbuss jokes at lunch, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
but
next one.
Exactly. What have we got next? These are nice.
Pretty.
These are nice.
This is like gun porn, Gavin.
Yeah. Okay. Now this pair of guns. These are very interesting. These are immediate post-war. They're built by a maker, Frank Sodier, who was a Fairlack gun maker in Austria. Now he was quite cunning. I've seen a lot of his guns, and they're all built 46, 47, 48. And you just scratch your head and think, why the hell was that? Why the hell have they all ended up in this country? And of course the reason they've all ended up in this country is because that part of Austria was in the British zone of occupation, and we had an army based out there of officers who we've occupied the enemy country. We're here, we're sort of taking over its government and things. We haven't really got much to do. And these Austrian guns that they're making seem terribly cheap. I'm sure Sodier was probably the only one of the Austrian gun makers who spoke good English, because he seems to pretty much have sold a pair of guns to practically every serving British Army officer who came through his door. And these are rather wonderful. They're they're practically unused. They're like new. And the wonderful thing about it is they come with all of their paperwork. They've got the original order sheet, the receipts. They've got the sort of British Army of occupation paperwork that allows them to take the guns out of Austria. And also the bit signed by his commanding officer, giving him the authority to order this pair of guns.
That's gorgeous. I mean, being a bit of
it's just lovely having that that bit of history.
So I'm an Antiques Roadshow nut. I watch that rather than Country File on Sunday nights, and I always love that bit when they come to provenance.
Yeah,
it's all about provenance.
They suddenly become interesting. There's suddenly a story behind them, and you can suddenly see exactly the circumstances that that resulted them being built.
I bought a 12-bore off an elderly brigadier in my village, and it was on its last legs, but it came with such a wonderful story. It was impossible not to buy it. It was a Belgian-made 12-bore that somebody had jumped out of a bush in Burma and pointed at him and fired.
Right,
a Burmese bandit, he said. He said, of course, the Belgian 12-bore is no match for the Sterling submachine gun. I ordered my men to cut him down. I had it restocked in Germany after the war. Very cheap, actually.
Similar. Exactly.
Next one, please, Aaron. Wilkes.
Wilkes. Yeah, John Wilkes, fantastic London maker. Sadly, no longer trading. John Wilkes. They were on Beak Street, 79 Beak Street, until about 15 years ago, when their brothers Tom and John both retired. They were both well into their 70s at that point, but they ran a magnificent firm. And they built, you see, actually very few guns signed with their own name. They built a lot of guns within the trade for other gun makers, and they had a fantastic workshop building some of the very best guns for other people. They were quite sort of idiosyncratic sort of people, literally stepping into their shop in Beak Street. That's even if they let you through the door.
Because it's not core St James's, is it? I mean, you have to imagine that when the gun making world was dominating.
Yeah, well, they were tucked away in Soho down.
Yes, exactly. It's a long way away.
Yeah, tucked away in Soho, and a bit of a and particularly certainly when I was a boy going down there, it was certainly. I mean, nowadays it's all trendy microbreweries and fancy charcuterie restaurants and things around there. But when I was going there. So with my father sort of in the early 80s and then later on my own in the sort of 90s, and it was pretty dodgy down there. There were prostitutes hanging out on the street corners, and it wasn't a nice bit of London.
But they chose it and they thrived. Can you tell me about the engraving?
Beautiful engraving. It's engraved by Ken Hunt, who was the sort of the great master engraver of his generation. And pretty much the only he completely dominated this style of engraving. Heavy scroll work, some beautiful game scenes there, some lovely gold inlay work. It's an absolutely wonderful
it's a 12 gun. And it's a side lock or
12
side
bore.
plate?
It's 12 bore side lock ejector. Yeah, standard
it's
side by side.
Everything about 2 triggers, but you'll forgive
double trigger. Yeah, exactly. But it's just a very fine example. Very nice overall specification and condition.
And are people still looking for a kind of national average of 6.5 pounds, 14-inch stock, 30-inch barrels? Is that the kind of for a classic game gun, that is the kind of specification. But again, the market is changing, because again we've now had an entire generation of shots come into shooting via the over and under route. They're all predominantly used to a gun that's a pound heavier, and they like to carry out their sport not with an ounce or an ounce and a 16th of number 6, but 36 grams of number 4s, and the sport has evolved and changed, and they very often want a heavier gun with slightly longer barrels. Well, we had a crowd shot who made the case for side by side, saying if you're shooting a pheasant like that, you need an over and under. If you're shooting a grouse like that's why you need a side by side.
He's absolutely right. That quick, instinctive type of shooting, there is nothing to beat. A quick moving, fast handling side by side.
And do people collect engravers? So it doesn't really matter what the gun is, but the engraving is the key.
Yeah, they collect makers and they collect engravers. So this has got a sort of double-handed appeal. You've got the best engraver of his generation, and it is a very nice example of his work. And you've got collectors who will be looking to buy guns by Wilkes, because they don't often, they seldom come to the market. An example such as this one, certainly, you do very seldom see them anything like as nice as this. And this is it's built towards the end of their career. It was delivered in the early, I think it was ordered in 1987 and delivered in 91.
Oh, it was quite a lengthy order.
And it was mainly because the gun itself would have been about 18 months, but it was mainly getting that slot with Ken Hunt, who at that point in time was absolutely at the peak of his career.
Yes.
And you'd try and get an engraving slot, and you would need to be you couldn't just be anybody. You would need to have a personal introduction and kind of to get on the book, and you may well be waiting 2 or 3 years before your position in the queue comes up, and it's time for your gun to be engraved.
Because I'm not sure if I've got this. There seems to be sort of 2 kinds of engraving. There's the kind of traditional scroll work on the right, and then a much finer engraving for that bird in the middle. One of Hunt's specialities is that heavy scroll work, which I always think is really, absolutely the master of. And then you've got some lovely, sort of some very delicate, game scenes. Engraved in there. And for insurance purposes?
Well, it's this gun's carrying an estimate. I think we've got an estimate of 18 to 24,000 pounds.
18 to 24. That's. I mean.
But again, it's a gun that if you were having that gun built today, it probably would be. It'd be over 100,000 pounds worth of gun. It would be. Probably 120, 140,000 pounds to have that gun built today if Wilkes were still around.
Are the Wilkes brothers still with us?
No, they're not. No,
sadly.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sadly, no. Tom and John are both in that happy place in the sky.
The great uplands. Just on that, are there gunmakers, British gunmakers or even English gunmakers coming through at the moment in the same way that they used to, or are we seeing a bit of a slump?
Yes, no. I mean, we do. There are. Smith and Torrock are a new name. Again, they're both ex-Purdy men who have a hand in some of the best guns of the last 30 years and have a gun, have established their own name. David Sinnerton, who's an ex-Purdy finisher, builds 3 or 4 guns under his own name each year. There are quite a number of, if you like, sort of small artisan manufacturers
so
out
not
there
just
building. It's not just Purdy, Holland and Holland, Boss. There are a lot of very creative, ex-Purdy, ex-Holland outworkers out there, who still do a little bit of work, for their former employer. They do general repair work, stocking work, actioning work, and customers who know them personally commission them to build entire new guns for them.
A lot of the gun makers have also gone down the route of rebadging Spanish and Turkish. I know.
Really,
is there a point at which it is still an English gun?
What when you read? Well, it's not. Well, if you.
Well, I know it's made by Gruller. It's not. But if you do enough work on it.
No.
No. I think
it's very different. I mean, a good question in point would be, I mean, for example, Purdy have introduced a model, about 10 years ago, a Sporter, which was to hit the sort of £30,000 price point in the market, and it's a very good gun. But it was built in partnership with Perugini and Vicini. But it's actually, and people generally get it a bit wrong. They think, it's a P&V that's rebadged as a Purdy, but Purdy charge 40% more than P&V do for it, But the reality is the gun is actually, it's built, all the components are machined in this country, the barrels are done in this country. Then it goes to Italy to effectively be put together and laser engraved.
Right. Okay.
And then comes back for stocking and finishing. So it has, but it's still just the fact that it's had that foreign element in it. People have great difficulty
loving it
because it's not a real Purdy, is it?
It's
not quite in the same way that you can sort of point out. You can look at some of the modern, some of the modern cars, some of the modern sort of Bentleys and Rolls Royces, and you can look at them and say, well, actually, that Bentley is it's very nice, but it's a rebadged VW, and that Rolls Royce that nearly all of it comes from Munich.
Yes, and we now know this
and then gets painted and trimmed at Goodwood. It's okay. It's fantastic British engineering, but it's not, because it's German.
Yes. Okay. Right. Well, we do have. This has happened before. I mean, I know that there was a gun which I'm glad to say ended up with a cousin of mine in my family, which was referred to as the Purdy Gamekeeper, which was a mid 1910s box lock, and clearly kind of fell off the back of the Birmingham trade. Had the word Purdy written in it, more or less the right order, and sold for a few quid.
Well, they did. I mean, it has always. Purdy had they had a period where they produced other qualities of gun. They like to probably slightly forget about that, but they did B, C, D, and E quality guns. So, for example, they retailed Rook rifles. You'll sometimes see the Purdy name on a Mannlicher rifle that they retailed. And they had some lower grades of gun built. Another famous example in Boston Co. Fantastic, best London gun maker. But you will sometimes come across a very nice 20-bore box lock and think, wow, this is a fantastic gun. You look, it's signed J. Robertson, 13 Dover Street, London. It's like, what's 13 Dover Street? That's the Boss address, And it's like, yes, J. Robertson was actually the man who owned Boss.
Okay, right.
And he had sort of out in the back room a line of sort of, less expensive off-the-shelf guns. So that, for example, when he's taken an order from Lord Tiddleyhum for a pair of guns, But Lord Tiddlyhum, I'm looking for a 20 bore for my boy. You know, he's outgrown the 410. I'll order him a pair of 12s. You know, when he's for his 21st. I just want something to tide him over.
Okay,
here we go. And that is the reason they exist. So they they weren't pursuing a secondary line. They were just to sort of keep the client on side until we got the big order a little bit later on.